Welcome everyone to another Design Ops Aligned podcast. I am welcomed by a very special guest. And before I introduce him, he was the first person that reached out to the Design Ops Aligned team to want to come onto the show. And that means a lot to us, being as we only just started in August. And we were doing backflips when he did want to come on the show because, he was the first one that liked what we did and wanted to come on and wanted to speak from the heart on the topics he's going to speak about today. So welcome, Theo, for coming on the Design Ops Aligned podcast.
Naresh, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. Really appreciate you guys. And excited to chat UX as usual. I love it.
So Theo, do you want to give a quick introduction about yourself to everyone?
Yeah, sure. So, hey guys, I'm Theo Johnson. I'm a senior UX researcher at Microsoft, part of Growth and Incubation. So I've been doing UX research now for around almost 6 years. I've worked in the tech space, anywhere from Apple, Sony Music Entertainment. I worked at Meijer in the grocery e-commerce space, did some stuff with online casino work as well, and also some AR and VR. I have 4 publications in augmented reality and VR research and gaming UX. I have a master's in human-computer interaction from SUNY Oswego. I'm a musician. You guys can see I got plenty of guitars. Those who know me know I love music. I love UX. This industry is growing, and I'm here to help everybody learn all the newest and greatest things in the UX trends right now. So
you didn't mention about the AR VR stuff when we first met. I'm gonna dive into that one as we go into the podcast.
Yeah.
Theo, I want to take it from the top. I think you work in a very large organization, a very large corporate organization, where I'm going to really ask the question about, do large corporate organizations really look into UX research to help them formulate their backlogs before preparing any kind of designs from your perspective?
Yes, so the different orgs, like for instance, I've been in orgs where like at Apple, where they had these like kind of pod teams where you'd kind of be on this one specific UX team and you'd have your project you'd work on and you'd own that space. Whereas there are different orgs where you kind of come in and there really isn't a whole lot of UX and that's new to them, right? So things might move a little bit slower. There might be a little bit more value prop building, right? On, evaluating UX research and growing the space. A lot of that can deal with, corporate structure, hierarchies, right? Kind of like those multi-layered organizational structures kind of contributing, right, to those longer decision cycles. So we kind of see that sometimes, at Microsoft, or it just depends, right? So different orgs, different structures, but yeah, sometimes, it just varies throughout different orgs and their maturities in UX.
See, this is where it comes into where do you think that let me rephrase the question in a better way. Do you think corporate organizations are very slow in the uptake of research being brought into a product backlog? Now, let me give you my 2 cents in it. And this is why I really wanted to bring you up into the podcast, that a lot of people who work in these kind of large corporate organizations, especially in UX research, struggle in doing their work that's going to affect the backlog. Now, I've spoken to people and a lot of people since doing the podcast, and they find that basically, they're doing all this research work and it's kind of like water off a duck's back. It's kind of like not being heard. It's not being digested. And they find that they get sent out to do these kind of 3-month studies. And, the process is so slow in really getting the findings, educating people on their findings, and then affecting the backlog. And I wanted to get your 2 cents on this. What's your thoughts?
Yeah. So our team at Microsoft specifically, so you talk about how fast or how slow research is, right? So a lot of teams that aren't familiar, like let's say that they bring in a brand new UX researcher, right? Or they're building a team. A lot of times teams don't realize how slow sometimes research can take if it's longitudinal, or creating a research plan, going in, recruiting users, making sure you get approval from all the stakeholders, right? There's that entire holistic process. But one of the best things to do to take that slow kind of process, which I've seen, I actually have mentees that I've worked with that they're in research, and sometimes they feel like their voices aren't heard, is to really embed yourself with the teams and like be more of an advocate for research on the different channels. Examples, for me is kind of like, first say maybe we're working on a new project, right? And it's actually has a huge impact for one of the OKRs we have. And you create this entire journey map, you do all this research, but then you feel like you just kind of, get it done. And then maybe that team is like, you feel like you weren't heard. Well, if you're really embedded in all the stand-ups and all the product meetings, you're giving insights to your PMs and your stakeholders along the way and showcasing the value and saying, hey, sure, I can do that. That's going to go a long way, rather than just getting the work done, putting it in a repository and saying, all right, got the ticket, move it to done. I work in Agile, right? It's better to really showcase the value prop of what you're doing throughout the process. And if those teams can also share your work, or say, hey, this team did this great work. Wow. Huge kudos. Other teams are going to see that. They're going to pull you in, and that's going to become more love for the process of UX research. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I find that, do you think even in these large corporate organizations, UX researchers still have to pitch their value in what they bring? Now, I see it a lot in my career. Now, designers go through the struggle of just showing their value to product managers. And I see researchers still even fighting a harder battle. Would you say, because you work, obviously I don't want to mention the name, we'll bleep out the name of who you worked with in the beginning. But do you feel that basically, in these large organizations, researchers still have to pitch their value and what they bring to products?
I feel like they do. I feel like that's still a thing, because a lot of, places, they feel that, talking to users, maybe as a product manager, maybe they can just do that, right? Or maybe, I understand, or I think users need this, so why do we need to test it? Because based on what I think, that's the answer. That's not the answer we need. So that's when UX research comes in and becomes the Thor's hammer, right? And comes in and it's like, all right, boom, we're going to test, X amount of users with this design, right? Get feedback to see if this is the thing that we actually need. Show like videos or any sort of product feedback based on user data and trends too. Can't forget about the quant part, right? Because the mixed methods is huge. The triangulation of data, being able to show both sides, the numbers and the videos and the affinity maps, whatever you got from the qual side, you mash together right there is what will kind of show the heart and the value of UX research. And it's like, people say they've done research. Okay. And they say that, it's like, please tell me what kind of research. Oh, I just had a couple meetings with a couple people. What other research did you do? Did you do competitive analysis, right? Did you do, cost benefit analysis on something, right? Did you kind of go deeper, on any quantitative data? Have you done any surveys asking what users feel, on a specific product, that you're kind of working on, or feature basis?
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
But this is something, and you're not the first researcher I brought on. And I asked this question to all of them. And again, I'll play devil's advocate in what I know from my experience with product managers. I've heard a lot of product managers mention that the reason why they don't go down using researchers, and I've had people who've been working with UX or the UX departments for a very long time. But generally, what I hear is that the reason why they don't go down a continuous discovery path is that by the time they find out the information from the researchers, that development cycle is already gone. And this is a common thing I'm seeing where product managers are just saying, hey, it takes too long, and, really they use researchers for validation rather than illumination, Now, what do you think needs to change? Because it's not something I'm hearing for the first time. It's something I'm hearing again and again and again. What do you think needs to change in order for research to be a better place?
I think it comes in the idea of conducting kind of parallel research tracks along with what they're doing. So like running like kind of smaller research tracks, because they can kind of accelerate delivery, maybe like a parallel study with A/B testing. Like, yeah, like a lot of places work in these, these 2-week sprints. And you think, wow, like what can we get done and how can we get user feedback quick? Well, that's where creating, specific cycles or building programs that can accelerate research findings, bringing in users and stuff like that. I'm more of like creating that repository, understanding your users. So of course, this kind of, you think about it, you're like, whoa, but that's research. Sometimes it does take time, unfortunately, but the value, right? The value that it brings at the end is just immaculate. It's like, if you could just be a little patient. I know some businesses, they don't want to wait and says, oh, we don't have time for this. We don't have time for this. So it's like, yeah, but if you do like a benefit analysis and you kind of do a comparison of doing some testing, running even like an unmoderated test, even if it's like 50 users, right? And you can send it out using user testing. That's going to go a long way, a lot more. That's going to be better for your product feedback. And of course, then you think, well, you bring the feedback to the product manager, right? And you're like, oh, well, there's all this stuff. We only have so much time. Well, take some bits and pieces of that, right? So like maybe there is some stuff, if it's not super high critical, seriously, move in a couple things here and there. Like, I don't know. It depends on what you're testing, right? But it's like picking and choosing the things that can be valuable for the sprint that's there. And then saying, okay, well, maybe over time we can work on X, Y, and Z. So it's like you take, you go out there, you do your work, and you try to show the value prop, and you work in that, I call it like kind of like, you feel like it's a slow lane because they want you to, get everything done quicker. But at the same time, it's like, hey, like these insights are valuable, right? And it's, I guess, like you said, right? It's all about how do you kind of put that in a sprint cycle, with the devs, that's going to make sense. Because when you get into these bigger studies, these longitudinal studies or generative research, especially, there's a lot of times where I'm really diving deep, looking at market analysis, diving on and trying to understand what are these competitors doing, and that's like a whole separate subject, but at the same time, it's related, right? Because you got to be able to kind of make everything kind of flow continuously.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, personally, being a designer in the past, I think research or UX researchers bring the most value, in my opinion. Our job is to do the scientific aspect of the designs, but it's that research is that missing glue between a good experience and a bad experience. Now, a designer can just make up stuff and make up things based on looking at other websites and stuff like that. But if you really want to get the real nitty gritty, I think, you got to have UX researchers involved in the game to really bring more value and to mitigate risks. That's where I think researchers are best positioned in making sure product managers don't push something to production that's not going to make sense. I want to dive into something that you just mentioned. You just mentioned a little word of it, and you talked about repos. Yeah. Now, in my experience, and now this is a big subject. This I like this because I'm going to be
swimming in the ocean.
Yeah. Whoa. This is one of the things, because I have a research ops. My business partner, she's a research ops. And one of the, I think, okay, I would say 99% of the people that we ask when we're working with contracts at the moment, we ask them, do you look into the repo before you do any of your product designing, or before you've even ideated your product? 99% say no. Yeah. Now, I play devil's advocate when I go on a podcast, or the reason being why they say they don't go on a repo. And this is before AI and like Marvin, like where you can ask kind of question. Before, it was not structured in a way where you can get key learnings from it. And so what's happened is that people have not seen the value of repos in the industry. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I've done my research and I put it into a repo, like it's a checkbox. You can kind of access it when you want, but it doesn't act, or people have not designed repos in a good way that people can access key information. Now, what's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, repos can be interesting. I've seen repos on the research side. Like I've helped build repositories of user bases, right? People that maybe we've tested with, and we kind of keep building that, and we segment those users. That way we can just easily pull them, for, doing any sort of user testing, or like you said, design assets. That could be, stuff for, mobile or web, UI stuff. It could be user flows. It could be customer journey maps. It could be, something very, very specific that's an artifact. Maybe, and this is where, like you said, right? So people don't go back. Well, sometimes, right, you do research on a process. Example, I can give like a mock example, you go in, you understand a flow, you understand where the pain points and processes are for a specific process, like a journey map, right? And it shows all the pain points and then the opportunities where automation can be made, right? Maybe that was for the previous year. And then there was all these comments saying, okay, cool, this is going to be fixed, this is going to be fixed, this might be fixed in this X year, right? But then guess what? Following year comes around and you're in a meeting and you're like, hey, we got this journey map here that shows X, Y, and Z. I think we have to go in, and I noticed like someone comes about and then maybe they change the process. That's when you can revisit that previous process. Fill up, hey, guess what? We actually have a journey map based on this, OKR initiative that we're working on. Let's pull it in. Let's talk about it. What has changed since this year? That's where I feel like the repos, like it's all about like kind of tying it in, and different orgs do different things, right? And sometimes the way users kind of interact with things, it's like they come into one thing, but that's connected to many other things, right? Yeah. So one thing can impact this, and it can impact, it's like a domino effect, right? So sometimes having those on hand. Now you said sharing, right? So I try to make sure that like if somebody wants to see any of the research that our team has done, any of the orgs that I've worked at, I make sure that's easily accessible. And also it's just nice to have. When I think of repos, I think of like one, like you said, right? Designs, kind of assets, stuff like that. But I also think of like repos as in user bases, right? And like segmenting users and having an area where you can just kind of pull users and, reach out to them and have an easy way of kind of contacting them. And that's in B2B, right? So that I feel like for me, that's working in B2C, like in customer facing, you might have millions of users, right? But in B2B, maybe you're for like that small B2B business, right? Or mid-size. Maybe you only have, I'm just spitting out here, like 2 or 3K users, right? That's your user base. But maybe you have like 400 or 500 of them that you can trust to be like, oh, I got this user base from, Ireland, or these people from Australia. I know that they're interested in giving feedback, so I can pull them and easily do research with them with no cost, no harm, and no barriers. That's kind of how I think.
I think it's one of the key things I'm trying to always get out of repos, or the fact of research that has been done. Do you think that researchers right now in this industry are doing a good job of keeping that? Let me rephrase it in a better way. Do you think like researchers right now in this industry are doing a good job in making sure they keep their repos or slide decks alive and keeping that continuous discovery open to our product managers? Because in my opinion, I think like, I'm not going to I wouldn't gaslight anyone that I know, but what I have experienced is that researchers at the moment fail to make sure that continuous learning and discovery is educated across different products. Now, you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. What's your thoughts?
I mean, that's opening a can of worms, Yeah. I mean, like I said, every org's different, And I've been in orgs where there wasn't any research. I've been in orgs where I was the only researcher. And then I've been in orgs where there was lots of researchers, right? So, I mean, there could always be better. I feel like with advocating, showcasing repos, showcasing process, being deeper in the product design process. But again, you do research, right? And you realize, let's say you're working with a bunch of different teams, and I work with a lot of different teams, right? You have to understand, you can't do you'll have oh my gosh, there's so many projects. Then you're like, that's time for maybe budget for another researcher, right? But then you have to advocate for that, right? Yeah. So it's that's where the happy medium comes in, is how do we create that nice kind of continuous flow of research can be involved in all these different areas, but without costing the company, so much money at the same, you know what I mean? So it's like making sure that like you're becoming valuable, and you're kind of staying up to date with things. But I do feel like sharing, being more involved, kind of, I would say hand holding. I just say be more like, inclusive with all this stuff, making sure that you're good with all.
So Theo, in my previous experience, I have seen product managers use researchers to just validate and put a tick on the box saying, yes, we've tested our feature, is ready to go. So they've used researchers in a way of just kind of like, hey, we done it, and we can move on to the next thing. Now, do you think this is a correct way of using researchers from your perspective?
I mean, I would definitely like if they're just showing a presentation saying we just tested this amount of users, what we got, and then they move on to the next slide. If I was to see that, I'd be like, hey, maybe you should show them like the before and after, like with the data that they had, or videos of users. Like, I feel like that with like leadership, man, they just love personal experience that had happen, like showing them real struggles of users going in, especially if they're like high profile clients going in using specific AI tools or anything, right? And they're like, oh my gosh, this could be a life changer. Them hearing that is saying, wow, like that actually shows like, wow, like maybe they're like, hey, who did your user research, right? Oh, this team did it, right? So it's like that actually helps out that UX team a little bit more, showcasing. And then of course, sometimes stakeholders, when you go to leadership, they don't want less text. They want more visual, kind of straight to the point, right? Making sure that you're not wasting their time, but they're also getting the point across. There's ways of really showing UX and storytelling, that could, I think, are a little bit more influential than that it just shows that maturity in UX, and the value prop of research, right? So
I love that. I love that last bit you just mentioned, because it's one of the key things, storytelling. Do you think,
yes.
Because it's one of the big things that designers have to do, do you think it's a missing skill in UX research?
Yeah, I mean, like when I see like some research, I'll just like, for instance, I do a lot of mentoring and ADP lists, right? So I do get a lot of people showing me their portfolios or even showing a case study. The same thing, right? You're storytelling, you're trying to tell the person, right? Almost like a dummy can do it, right? It's like, hey, this was the objective. This is what we did. This is how we fixed it. And this is who I worked with. These are the methods that we went through to actually solve this, right? And then we found X, Y, and Z. We could have done X, Y, and Z better, right? I feel like if you could storytell and talk about your research in a way that's a little more impactful, then being like, all right, so we use this method. We test this many users. This is what we did. We found this, and then you move on. Okay, well, was there anything that is standing out? Was there any like interesting themes that came out? Was there anything that was a little bit unique? And then also too, a lot of times when I go through and I present research, right, I try to tell it, make sure you talk about the methods you use. You talk about, does it tie into any OKRs, right? And then also user feedback, and then opportunities, and then showcase them. Hey, we found that, let's say you just, have this study, right? You're doing a qualitative study, you're testing like 15, 20 users. And we actually found, we found that, 14 out of 20 of these users really didn't like this, but they preferred this. Here's why, right? Show the video, couple quotes, couple videos of them. Man, this isn't working, blah, 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 but this would be fantastic. And then kind of go in and being creative and being good at like visuals and stuff like that, which, by the way, I bet, last like 3 or 4 years, I've been working myself to improve my storytelling using like Figma and Miro, right? To kind of build great artifacts instead of just typing in PowerPoint and then just doing bullet points. Tell a story. I feel like that kind of shows, wow, they're kind of mature in their UX ways, but they're also like showing that little bit of design, with like the UXR, I mean, for me, that's been a big hit, and it seems to really resonate with stakeholders.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it's one of the key things that we've noticed. A lot of the people we're working with at the moment, especially some of the researchers, they've asked for templates to use. And one of the key things that my business partner does, she just builds a kind of simplified a template where it's just like, hey, this is the information in 1 minute, or here's a 3-minute video, or here's a 5-minute video. And what she tells the people that we work with is you have to do a persona analysis on your stakeholders, because each of your different stakeholders are interested in certain things. So don't show this person who's interested in just the quick notes, the 5-minute video, show them the 1-minute video, you know? And this has become one of the key things that we do in helping teams in establishing their audience. And again, the ability to storytell is a big piece of that puzzle. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And yeah, I think if a researcher takes away all that academic stuff that happens in the research and just really makes it attractive, like we have to do with design and UI design and et cetera, I think it gets more digested, from my opinion. So
yeah, and I feel like you're prioritizing, right, core insights, and that'll drive the most impact there too. It's like, how do you take, like, yeah, you may have done this giant study, or maybe, you know, sometimes where you work, it could be a little bit slower, right? But let's say you did work and, man, I ran this 3-month study. There's so much. How do I condense it? Focus on the stuff that matters and the stuff that you think is going to drive most with that audience. And sometimes, I've been, you know, asked this before too, is different stakeholders. Sometimes you know what that stakeholder, like what they like to see too. So you kind of cater, right, to presenting a certain way to that specific stakeholder. You know, so sometimes you got to think a little bit outside the box. And you mentioned, right, templates, right? So, I do a lot of storyboarding, right? So I have these specific templates and ways I create them in Figma, and specifically, like, this is how we're going to run this presentation. But sometimes you kind of mix it around a little bit, you fiddle with it. But then again, once you start putting the, you know, all the abstract on there and all the artifacts, it's pretty straightforward. And again, that storytelling aspect, and then having notes too. Like I always tell, you know, any of my mentees, or just, you know, when I do my research, right, when I'm presenting something, especially leadership, I have that notebook ready. You know, I have it there, like, you know, I have my notes. Like, I don't want to just be spitting stuff. You know, I want to be ready to go, talk about the numbers, talk about how we came up with this. What's the value prop? What's the impact? Hey, this is our next step. This is what we need to hammer in on and talk about that. Cause that for me is like, okay, they know what they're doing. They're go-getter, right? They have the numbers. They have the data. Boom. You know?
Enjoying the content? Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram for more updates. Your support helps us bring you even more great content. Now let's get back to our podcast.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. I think, you know, you want to make sure that you're presenting everything and it's being digested in the right way. But then that ties into my next kind of question I want to kind of ask you. Like, how difficult is it to turn insights into real features in the backlog, you know, from your perspective?
Yeah. So a lot of that comes with that kind of, you know, looking at the cost of what it is, like, especially if it's a major overhaul and you're trying to redo like an entire website and there's like all these different things. Well, if they have an idea already of kind of what's going on, it might be a little bit different. But let's say that you got a groundbreaking bug, or, you know, you're testing something and it's continuously an issue, and you know that it's going to cost time and effort and money. And then, like you said, right, it's like, how do you take the feedback and the insights that we get and fit them in a cycle that makes sense?
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes, and I'm not, you know, I'm just, sometimes it's, you know, you have your constraint, you have the, you know, the budget that you have, and you have your constrictions. And sometimes you have to just, I wouldn't say just deal with it, but, you know, you got to be able to kind of, you know, adopt and figure out how you can fit in certain things into the backlog as a feature that is going to be able to be prioritized over other things, especially based on the research. And if you get pushback on that, just try to be sure that you're showing the value prop, like especially PMs, right? So it's like, hey, I needed this research, but this is a very high effort thing. I don't know if we're going to be able to implement that. And then you can say, well, what can we implement? Right? Like, what can we, you know, put in here that can make a positive change or create more adoption or retention, right? Maybe there's maybe a specific flow that we're missing. Maybe there's other ways. Maybe there's an entryway, like, and it's crazy too. A lot of times, especially working B2B, sometimes there's like this thing and you like, oh my gosh, like it's actually not that hard to fix, which has happened many times, right? It could be a domain thing. It could be anything that's causing the problem. So it's always really good to look at the big picture. But again, it can get pretty fishy when you get to that, because you have a lot of features. You got to be able to figure out what can you move forward on and what's going to help the business the most, and also keep users happy, because you always want to make users happy, right?
You know, I want to pull up something that you just mentioned. Obviously, you mentioned it as a short thing, like, hey, you have to deal with it. But my 2 cents is that research, UX research, is such a hard field. It's harder than the design, because it's like, and you know, you can quote me if I'm right or wrong with this. I find that most of the stuff that researchers can bring, or the value that they can bring, really falls on deaf ears. And do you think people that are coming into this industry from the research side are being told what it's really like in real life from your perspective? Because being somebody that's on the ADP list, do you tell people that when you go into this industry, you know, and quote me, 9 out of 10 times of your research is not going to make it into production? How do you tell people that realization of what it's like?
Well, I mean, that is tough, right?
That's a tough one, isn't it? It's a tough question.
And then it makes you feel like, well, I did all this work, and then it's like, wow, like you might get one thing out of all that work you did that's going to be able to be implemented. But yeah, I mean, when I talk to my mentees and they ask me about what's it like working in UXR, I do mention there's a lot of different research you do, and sometimes you'll go through and do a bunch of research, and it can be like this extravagant thing, and sometimes you work really hard to work with different PMs or different, stakeholders, and sometimes only certain things are implemented based off the research you do. It's just a matter of the benefit of that research and like just sticking with it, Like you said, research is difficult, and I think there's all these different fields, right? So we have like the mixed methods, we have like UX architects, that's more like designy, but I'm seeing a lot of unicorn roles, like the generalist, right? But like for research, I feel there's the quant, there's the qual, and there's the mix. I do a lot of qual research, and I work a lot with people, right? And storytelling and, creating those journey maps and doing all that. But I think a lot of times, when you're doing a lot of stuff with quantitative, research, you got to be able to kind of meld it, especially if you're on the senior level. Like I've been trying to learn a little bit more about, max diff, getting a little bit more into linear regressions again. 'Cause I did a lot of that in my academia, but using Power BI, doing a lot more segmentation of data. I got a lot of mentees that say, hey, like, am I going to be coding? Am I going to be doing Java or Python? I said, well, you might be using R to cycle through some data if you're in a quant role. You're going to be working a lot with users if you're a qual person, but if you're a mixed methods person, you're going to be doing a little bit of both,
Yeah. Well, this is it. I think, if you have a good maturity in your design team and in your research team, I personally believe that researchers should be looking into core data findings. They're the ones that should be on a daily basis looking into, the quant data that comes to then feed into their backlog. They should be looking into like the Tableau reports or Power BI reports and tracking everything, or even tracking the impacts of features to then report back. So this, I remember somebody I was working with a few years back, and they were like, hey, I've been given this Hotjar tool, and I can't make heads or tails of it. I'm like, really and truly, I said, like, that is what research is about. You're about getting that data and feeding
and all
it.
That.
Yeah. And, and heat maps and showing us the stress recordings and, making it a popcorn night where we look into it and say, hey, what's going on? And without that stuff, what you're doing is not feeding it back into us to know what we need to improve. And a lot of researchers that I spoke to at that time who weren't doing that sort of stuff found it like, hey, that's not my job. That's somebody else's job. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I actually worked in a role, a few years back where I was using Hotjar I mean, it was great research insights. I was able to tie it back to what I was having user interviews with people. And I'm like, hey, I could see this right here, in this. I feel being in those tools is super helpful. And not every company too. Like I know a lot of researchers, like they're not doing it because maybe they don't have the tools, but I'm sure they have something, right? Like different companies have different things. But yeah, having access to that data, it just lets you know more about your user base and the patterns and these users or what they do. That's super, super important,
Yeah, it's a gold mine. And I was kind of taken back. Obviously, I understood, like, if you've come into and I'm talking about the PhD people that have come into research.
Yeah.
Generally, PhD people that have come into a research perspective are kind of good in that. But the people who haven't done a PhD tend to think that I'm going to just speak to users or I'm going to do interviews and that's the data I'm going to feed back into users. But, they're missing the gold mine of key data. And, I had somebody say to me, like, shouldn't it be a data analyst that does this? I'm like, yeah, probably. But, at the end of the day, that's what I think researchers should be as well. They should be data analysts. What's your thoughts?
You got to be careful, like with how much, because you got to remember how much, qual people could take on as far as their backlog. I mean, yes, you're going to be siphoning through data and looking at stuff. It's nice to have data analysts on hand and people that are data scientists, right? Because I've seen that on my orgs. But when you're working on a specific project, I mean, sometimes you get backed up with a bunch of other stuff. And like if you're having to also monitor a bunch of other stuff, right? So that's where relationships come in hand in your business too, like building trust with these other, people that work in your org, right? And being tied to those teams and, getting data and being able to get it efficiently and get it quickly. That makes sense.
Agreed. No, totally agree. I don't think a researcher should be a sole data analyst, but they should have, it's like, it's like the whole question where they think a UX designer should know how to do graphic design or UI design. Look, at the end of the day, I'm a strong believer of the specialized role. I don't believe in the generalist. I'm old school. I think like, yes, you should know a bit of UI design, but that should not be your expertise. Do you know what I mean? And I think the same about research. I think like, okay, you can be a UX researcher, but you should be able to go in and get data and extrapolate it to then use into some of the findings. Do you know what I mean? I want to take a different take on this. I mean, with the Explorer, because it can't be a podcast without AI, you have to drop some AI into it.
Yep.
I mean, right now with the use of AI and, I personally believe AI has been more beneficial on the research side than on the design side.
Yes.
Now, what's your take on this at the moment?
I agree. Oh my gosh, man. Like I was just having a conversation the other day. I'm a musician, obviously, right? I see my guitars in the background. And it's funny because like they wanted to create it. This just comes to design, right? They wanted to create like a graphic for their music festival and it was made with AI and like they got a ton of smack for it because it wasn't, specifically what people wanted, right? So I'm just throwing that out there, right? Research, right? Because it's just like, I want to see this, and that based on this. Done. You got Flux AI, you got Open AI, you got, Google's Gemini, you got all these different things now, right? That you kind of put in and it spits out an image, right? When it comes to UX, it's like, how exactly do you know that that's what we need?
Yeah.
But with research, check this out. I mean, the amount of tools now that like you can like use AI to enhance it, like for instance, user testing, automatic sentiment, right? Quick summaries on specific like little things. And then of course, sometimes you still got to go in there, dive in, make sure, because AI sometimes will spit out nonsense and you're like, that's not what these people said. Like, Cheryl went and got coffee this morning. I'm like, that's not part of the research, right? So it's like, sometimes you have to take it and take the human aspect of yourself as a researcher. But I'm telling you what, man, I've been able to use use AI to really help guide quick summaries, and tailor a lot of insights and shorten stuff up and make them, make it not be as wordy with a lot of the stuff that we give back, to our stakeholders and our product managers. So there are a lot of benefits, but don't, it's like I try to tell all my mentees, please do not just rely on going, hey, chat GPT, make this for me. It's like, oh my gosh, it's like, hey, like, I understand that I can use some of that, but again, like really hone your skills as a researcher, but apply AI where it's going to be beneficial to help streamline the UXR process. And that's where like that kind of the speed of research comes in. And that's really, really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, you just mentioned the fact of this chat, writing something into Chat GPT and saying, hey, just make this for me. I call that like a beginner knowledge of prompt engineering. And I think this is where I think the market's really moving into. A lot of people are moving into that prompt engineering aspect, just to build agents or just to build aspects on the AI to make work much more easier. And I'm actually going to have a podcast with somebody about this soon. So tune in, everyone, to this. I want to ask one more last question about AI. Now, I've seen a lot of people. I'm not going to name who. It's my business partner. And basically they have tried out this tool called synthetic users. Now, I've asked a few researchers about this, who've come on the podcast.
Synthetic users.
Have you not heard about it? Have you not heard of
I saw something on LinkedIn actually the other day. I was reading on it about that, and I saw somebody make a post about it actually. So it's becoming, and Reddit. I follow like UXR Reddit forums. So I'm always like trying to understand things, but yeah, that's interesting you're asking about it. So this is,
It's a very, very interesting one. I'm going to share my screen. I mean, just to get some clarity in this. So you can see like on here, you can see my screen and everything. Yeah. So it's user research without the recruitment. So, a lot of companies like user testing and, user analytics and you name it. They're looking into this and seeing like what's coming out from this. So, I mean, I want to get your take on it. Like, have you used it? Do you know what it is? Have you had the chance to do this?
Wow. I have not used this before. So for me, and it's to go up the top, it says trusted by Google. I mean, so you got these companies, Pepsi, Apple. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's getting a lot of people are starting to jump on the bandwagon on this. And let me stop sharing my screen. So, the data that's coming out of it, I'm hearing it's learning very, very quick. It's growing very, very quick. And they say, obviously with AI, we know that it's not 100%, but the feedback I've had from people that are using synthetic users who have actually used synthetic users and done user testing with real people say it's near enough 99% close to what they're finding. Now, what's your take?
Holy cow. Well, my first question is like, how do they build those AI users? Do they just do a bunch of surveys and like population stuff and like user feedback, behavioral stuff, and they put them in these like segments? Like, to me, that sounds fascinating. I mean, if we could use it where it's helpful, sure, but is it going to show empathy? Right? It's like,
that's the biggest question. It's the biggest question. I mean, I wanted to drop this one to you because, it's something that's being talked a lot in the research industry. Obviously, I'm not so in tune with the research industry. My business partner is, she has been messing around with it. She's been testing it. I'll give you my 2 cents on what she thinks. Like, obviously, it's quick, it's easy, it's fast, it's cheap. Fine. That's what AI is. It's quick, fast, easy, cheap, done. I personally think that we will not move to this because we are still human and we still want that human touch.
I feel like it's prone to error. Like, if I was to test with that many users, I mean, what if you're missing out on a specific user base, or there's something that's really going to annoy a user? Like, this is where the computational model, and I always think, like, you always joke around Skynet, right? It's like eventually, like, holy cow, are these computers going to feel emotion? And I don't know if you've read some stuff, like they're starting to get that smart where they can talk back to you, and like even I know, like, I just updated my iPhone and there's new AI ChatGPT stuff with Siri, and I'm like, really now, so it's like you see this evolution. It's definitely being implemented in many things, but when's it going to get to the point where there is emotion? And that's kind of scary. But when it comes to making products and doing research, I mean, I just talking to real people, you know, and people that work, especially in, like for me, B2B, it's like, especially B2B, you know, these companies, they want specific things and they work specific ways and they have specific needs, right? And then you build those trust with those users. How are you going to build trust with an AI user? You know,
yeah, true.
You know,
very true.
So,
I mean, you know, in my opinion, I think humans are not linear, and I love the aspect that we're not linear. You know, and the findings that you get from research are just, I love it. I love it. It
Same.
really,
Yep.
It brings that pulse when you see usability to, in fact, you know, any form of research that I'm involved with. When I've asked researchers that involve me, I tell my business partner to involve me more. But I really get a rush out of it. I know, honestly.
Yeah.
I remember, you know, back in the day when researchers used to do some form of study, they used to ask for moderators, and I used to try and jump into it as much as possible. And it just showed me that, you know, as a designer, you put so much effort into these little things, and it makes the big picture. And when you see those little things working, it really does bring that rush into the designs. It really does bring that fulfillment. So yeah, I personally think that we're never going to move away from testing with real people, but you know, who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, future's an interesting place. I guess we'll see what happens. So, I mean, there's a lot of big changes going on in the industry, right? But yeah, I mean, you see AI now being implemented in almost every single tool, you know, and it's curious on how it's going to impact product design and research in the future. So,
yeah. Theo, we come to the end of the show, and I want to take the time to mention something. You mentioned that you're on ADP list, and you're mentoring a lot of students, and people who might be listening to this podcast might want to come and get in touch with you. So how would you say is the best to get in touch with you to help in their career? Okay.
LinkedIn, because right on the featured area, it says get mentored by me. I do have limited availability because I've been very busy throughout the holidays, but slots are opening up, you know, throughout the new year. So guys, just get on there, pop a session with me. I have just open chat, 20 minutes. And then I do have this, paid thing where I work with you over 4 weeks to kind of transform your UX career. So if you're interested, that's an option for you as well.
Nice. I'm going to really promote that because, you know, after speaking to you, and we've spoke before this podcast, I really like your mannerisms in helping people and what you believe in. Obviously, today I wanted to really dive into some hard topics, and you really knocked it out of the park. So thank you, Theo, for coming onto the show. So.
Thank you so much, Naresh. Appreciate it.